Everything you've been told about human history rests on a single comfortable assumption, repeated so often that it feels like truth, that civilization rose once, slowly, painfully, inevitably, climbing from scattered tribes to cities, from stone tools to orbiting satellites. But as you stand here now, listening to a world that hums with electricity and quiet confidence, another story waits beneath the surface, older and heavier than anything written in books. It whispers from drowned coastlines, shattered mountains, and the faint tremor of questions we were trained not to ask. What if the straight line of history was never a line at all? What if it was a cycle, a wheel, turning again and again through forgotten ages? And what if our place upon it is far less secure than we imagine? There are patterns that refuse to stay buried, civilizations that appear already mature, with architecture too precise, mathematics too elegant, astronomies too advanced for the cultures credited with their creation. These anomalies linger like fractures in a mirror, small but undeniable. You may have felt it too, that strange pull when you look at a megalith carved with impossible geometry, or when you hear of a city lying hundreds of feet beneath the ocean, untouched for millennia. Something inside you recognizes the shape of a memory you cannot explain, something ancient, inherited, waiting. Here is the forbidden proposition. Humanity has not risen once. It has risen 7 times, 6 times. The world erased everything. Oceans swallowed coastlines. Firestorms redrew continents. Skies darkened for years. And yet survivors walked away, carrying fragments of knowledge that would one day seem miraculous when rediscovered. These were not myths, but echoes. Not legends, but warnings. Every cycle built monuments to resist oblivion. Every cycle left clues for those who would come after. But those clues depend on a viewer willing to see, and most people never look long enough. You, however, are not most people. You are here, listening, following the thread back into the dark. That makes you a witness. And whether you ask for that role or not, the moment you step into this story, the world around you begins to change. Familiar facts loosen. Accepted timelines blur. The ground beneath modern confidence becomes soft, unstable. Something doesn't fit, and you have always felt it. Now the cracks widen. Consider the impossibility of our own rise. 10,000 years ago, the world was locked in ice. Within a geological blink, humans built agriculture, astronomy, writing, mathematics, metallurgy, calendars aligned with the turning of the heavens. How did a species without a known precursor suddenly display knowledge requiring millennia of accumulation? Why does technology stall, then appear again in disconnected regions as if remembered rather than invented? Why do the earliest layers of certain monuments show the most precision, as if crafted by hands that already understood something we supposedly learned only later? These are not isolated curiosities. They form a pattern too symmetrical to ignore. And patterns are the true language of the past. They repeat when history repeats. They re-emerge when memory fails. They warn when a cycle approaches its turning point. Imagine 6 forgotten civilizations rising from the dust of catastrophe, each believing they were the first, each carrying the last sparks of whatever came before. Imagine cities now resting on continental shelves, built when sea levels were lower, when coastlines reached farther, when the world looked unfamiliar to us. Imagine knowledge encoded not only in stone, but in the human genome itself, passed down as traits, instincts, fragments of spatial awareness, and ancestral fear. Imagine that the echoes of ancient catastrophes still live in our bones, waiting to awaken when the world starts to shift again. But to accept the possibility of a cyclical past is to confront an uncomfortable implication. Cycles do not stop. They continue. They return. And if 6 civilizations were erased before ours, what does that say about the one we are building now? What does it say about the storms gathering at the edges of our age, about the rising seas, the trembling magnetic field, the subtle sense that the world is approaching a threshold it has crossed many times? We pride ourselves on our progress, yet progress may simply be what humans do in the quiet space between catastrophes. It may be a reflex older than memory. This is the first truth that history tried to bury. We are not the pinnacle. We are the seventh attempt. And something suggests the eighth is already forming, shaped by forces we barely understand. For now, all you need to know is this: the evidence is everywhere, in stone, in water, in DNA, in the sky. But the official narrative bends around these anomalies, smoothing the rough edges, hiding the fractures, not out of malice, but out of fear. For if the world knew how many times the cycle had turned, how close we might be to another reset, the illusion of stability would collapse. As this journey begins, let the comfortable lie fall away. Let the older story rise. Let the patterns speak. Because once you see the cycle, you cannot unsee it. And in the next breath, we will step into the first fracture in the timeline, where the past begins to resist the story written about it. The fractures widen as we move deeper, following the uneasy echo left at the end of the first block. That subtle vibration suggesting that history itself is resisting the story we have been taught. It begins quietly, almost politely, with details small enough to ignore. A polished stone too perfect for the tools attributed to its makers. A monument aligned so precisely with a solstice that even our modern instruments marvel at the accuracy. A culture that appears in the archaeological record already fully formed, as if it stepped onto the stage of history without rehearsal. Individually, these anomalies are curiosities. Together, they form pressure, shaping a question most refuse to ask. How many times has human civilization begun not from nothing, but from the leftover fragments of something older? You feel this pressure as you walk through the ruins left behind by cultures that supposedly crawled from primitive beginnings. The story says their knowledge grew slowly, but the stones tell a different story. Across continents, separated by oceans and ages, ancient structures share a geometric language too advanced for coincidence. Foundations cut with engineering sophistication that should not exist for millennia. Astronomical corridors aligned with cycles requiring generations of observation. These are not the signatures of beginners. They are the remnants of a memory being acted out by hands, guided by something deeper than the timeline suggests. It is here, in this growing tension between official chronology and the evidence carved into bedrock, that our central mystery emerges. Not a single figure, but a presence, an intelligence or a tradition older than the civilizations we study. It is not represented by a king or a city, but by patterns. It moves through epochs the way wind traces dunes, shaping cultures that later forget its touch. Some call it the legacy of the first people. Others imagine a vanished global network of navigators, astronomers, and builders whose knowledge was scattered by catastrophe. Whatever name we choose, this presence appears and vanishes with uncanny regularity, its fingerprints left in stone geometry, celestial tracking, and myths of teachers who arrived after the world burned. As you listen, the narrative promises no certainties. The investigation is not about proving what happened, but understanding why something in our history refuses to settle into the neat containers we build for it. Why do civilizations appear with sudden, inexplicable mastery? Why do they collapse just as abruptly, leaving behind structures their descendants cannot replicate? And why do these rises and falls echo across Earth like a heartbeat, pulsing through continents and myths as if guided by a rhythm older than memory? Consider the abrupt emergence of Sumer. One moment, scattered settlements. The next, writing systems, advanced irrigation, astronomy, legal codes, mathematics. No developmental staircase, just a door opening into complexity as if someone turned a key. Or look to pre-dynastic Egypt, where the earliest masonry shows the highest precision, then declines over time. How does mastery precede experimentation? How does perfection come before practice? These contradictions accumulate until they become impossible to dismiss. They suggest that what we call the dawn of civilization may actually be the flicker of a rekindled flame, the early glow of knowledge, preserved by survivors who remembered enough to rebuild, but not enough to restore the world that came before. And as these survivors dispersed, their memories fractured, becoming myths, rituals, symbols, and architecture reflecting forgotten instruction. This brings us to a deeper fracture, one that feels almost personal. It appears not in stone, but in story. Across the world, cultures isolated by oceans share myths of a time before the last catastrophe, when teachers emerged from the sea or the sky to guide humanity toward order. They bring writing, agriculture, astronomy. Sometimes they wear cloaks of feathers, sometimes scales, sometimes light. They arrive after the floodwaters recede. They always vanish once the new civilization stabilizes. Why would such similar myths emerge in cultures that could not have exchanged them, unless the memory was older than their separation, unless it was carried within the survivors themselves? This is where the presence becomes more than an idea. It becomes a thread binding the 7 rises of humanity. It becomes the shadow of the 6 civilizations erased before ours. It becomes the quiet force at the heart of the anomaly. Knowledge that appears without a clear origin, like a language spoken by someone who does not remember learning it. And if the world truly moved in cycles, rising and falling 6 times before the 7th age we now inhabit, then the fractures in our timeline are not mistakes. They are scars, but every scar points to the wound that made it. As we step closer to this realization, the ground beneath official history loosens further. The timeline is no longer a ladder. It is a palimpsest, a layered manuscript rewritten after each global reset. The oldest writing is faint, but not gone. The oldest monuments lean but do not fall, and the oldest questions awaken as if waiting for this moment. The suspense builds not from fantasy, but from the way the evidence refuses to stay in its assigned box. You feel the story expanding, stretching past museums and textbooks, pulling you toward a version of the past that is both larger and more fragile than anything you were taught. Every anomaly we uncover does not answer the central mystery. It enlarges it. It suggests that something vast stands just beyond the horizon of recorded time, something erased 6 times yet never fully lost. And so the question begins to sharpen. If these fractures are real, what lies beyond them? We will follow that trail next, deeper into the physical contradictions, the artifacts that should not exist, yet do. Because once we step into the realm of out-of-place relics, the mystery shifts from subtle unease to undeniable confrontation. The trail leads us from fractures in the timeline into the landscape itself, into the world as it looked before the stories solidified into textbooks and certainty. The contradictions we uncovered were only the first hints. Now the terrain must expand, revealing the stage upon which the forgotten civilizations once stood. To understand the cycle, we must understand the world they inherited, the conditions they survived, and the knowledge they carried into the rebuilding of each age. The Earth was not always the calm, mapped, domesticated planet we know. It was volatile, shifting, unpredictable. Ice sheets rose and collapsed. Oceans advanced and retreated by hundreds of feet. Continents heaved under the weight of melting glaciers. Rivers changed course in a single lifetime. In that world, the survivors of a cataclysm would have walked through landscapes that felt wounded, unstable, half-formed. Their memories would mix awe with terror, and the monuments they built, those that endured, would not celebrate triumph. They would anchor meaning in a world that had lost its shape. Across this reconstructed landscape, patterns begin to appear. The earliest centers of civilization rise near ancient shorelines, now drowned beneath continental shelves. River valleys show signs of settlements older than their supposed founding dates. High plateaus shelter ruins with erosion patterns implying ages far beyond accepted timelines. Standing among these traces, you feel something subtle but unmistakable. The sense that the world humanity inherited after each reset was not a blank canvas, but a scarred one. Knowledge survived as fragments, but landscapes preserved shadows of entire worlds erased. Imagine the end of one of those forgotten ages, a coastline stretching hundreds of miles farther than it does today, cities perched on cliffs that no longer exist, harbors now buried beneath layers of silt and seawater. The people who walked those lands would witness the ocean rising not gradually, but relentlessly, year after year. They would see forests drown and mountains fracture. They would feel the planet rearrange itself. Their stories would become myths, and their monuments would become warnings for those who would one day discover them without understanding the scale of the catastrophe that shaped them. These shifts were not gentle. Geological evidence hints at sudden climate oscillations, volcanic winters, meteor impacts, rapid sea level surges. For a civilization to survive such upheaval, it would need knowledge, not just practical skills, but memory encoded in stories, symbols, rituals, and structures capable of withstanding the disasters themselves. This is why the earliest layers of ruins often display the highest precision. They belong to people rebuilding from catastrophe, people who remembered enough to attempt permanence in a world where permanence had betrayed them before. Walk through the ruins of Göbekli Tepe, and you feel the strangeness instantly, a sight too advanced for the hunter-gatherers said to have built it. Wander the oldest temples of Peru, Egypt, or the Indus Valley, and you sense the same paradox. These places do not feel like the beginnings of something. They feel like the ends of something trying to begin again. They are not the first sparks of civilization. They are the last embers of a memory desperately preserved. And behind these monuments, the landscape itself tells a deeper story. The placement of ancient sites often aligns with geological stability, a choice you would make only if you had seen the ground betray you before. Many are positioned near water sources that would remain accessible even after dramatic sea level changes. Others sit along ridge lines that once overlooked coastlines that are gone now, swallowed by the ocean. These patterns suggest foresight. They suggest experience. They suggest that survivors of earlier cycles understood the risks well enough to build for a future they knew would outlive them. Across continents, these remnants share a quiet symmetry. They favor high ground. They align with stars that guided navigation long before recorded history. They preserve a geometry far older than the cultures credited with constructing them. And they cluster near fault lines, volcanic zones, and ancient lakes that once served as cradles of rebirth after global disasters. It is as if each new civilization emerged where the earth settled after chaos, rising from the safe pockets where survivors gathered. But the most haunting feature of this ancient world is what is missing. Whole regions show signs of habitation with no surviving structures. River deltas that should contain millennia of settlements instead reveal only the youngest layers. Vast stretches of desert, once fertile, now hold nothing but hints of buried foundations. The absence itself becomes evidence. It suggests that the earlier civilizations did not simply fade, they were removed, erased by forces that left only peripheral traces. When you reconstruct the world as it was at the end of each cataclysmic cycle, the scale becomes difficult to grasp. Coastlines shift by hundreds of miles. Population centers migrate upward. Networks of knowledge collapse into scattered enclaves. And in the silence that follows, the survivors become the seeds of the next age. They bring memories both literal and inherited. They build with urgency, guided by the fear that the world could turn against them again without warning. Through this lens, the monuments of the ancient world cease to be the achievements of rising civilizations. They become the lifeboats of civilizations already lost. They become anchors in time, reminders for descendants who would forget the catastrophes that shaped their lineage. And when you imagine this landscape not as a single epoch, but as the seventh iteration of a repeating cycle, everything begins to align. The myths of global floods, the sudden appearance of advanced architecture, the shared symbols across distant cultures, the inexplicable precision of the earliest structures. They all become echoes of landscapes once familiar, now submerged or eroded beyond recognition. The world we stand on feels stable, but the memory of instability lingers in our oldest stories. It lingers in the stones. It lingers in the places where the land still trembles, where volcanoes rumble, where coastlines creep backward. These reminders are not random. They are part of the cycle. They are part of the world the six lost civilizations knew intimately. And as we follow these traces deeper, the next threshold approaches. We have walked through fractures in history and into the landscapes left behind. Now we must confront the anomalies that refuse to stay buried, the artifacts that should not exist, yet do. For in those objects, polished by time yet resistant to explanation, the forgotten ages speak most clearly. In the next block, we descend into the realm of out-of-place artifacts, where the past challenges our understanding with objects that defy every timeline we have accepted. The world deepens as we move from the reimagined landscape into the first true contradictions that refuse to bow to official timelines. These anomalies do more than challenge our assumptions. They stand like quiet sentinels guarding the truth of the cycles. They emerge from quarries, riverbeds, mines, sunken chambers, and geological layers so ancient that their presence feels almost intrusive, as if they were never meant to be seen again. Out-of-place artifacts, the name given to these relics, carry an unsettling weight. They do not shout. They whisper. They wait for eyes willing to see what their existence implies. And once you see them, the narrative of linear progress begins to unravel like a thread pulled from a tapestry. Each artifact becomes a message from one of the lost civilizations, preserved not by intention but by accident, as if the earth itself failed to erase every trace of what came before. Consider a metal sphere embedded in rock far older than metallurgy, a footprint pressed into a geological layer predating the species said to have made it, a precision-drilled core extracted with a method supposedly invented only in recent centuries. These objects do not ask for belief, they ask for explanation. Yet none fits comfortably into the official story. They are dismissed, reclassified, ignored. But what if they are not anomalies at all? What if they are the remnants of technologies used by civilizations erased long before ours began its ascent? This possibility does not require certainty. It requires only a recognition of pattern, a recognition that similar traces appear across continents and ages, forming a lattice of quiet rebellion against the accepted timeline. The deeper we move into these artifacts, the more the cycle begins to materialize. One civilization leaves behind a tool too advanced for its assigned era. Another leaves a chamber carved with precision no primitive chisels could achieve. Another leaves stone blocks bearing machining marks identical to those created by high-speed cutting tools. These are not isolated curiosities. They are symptoms of forgotten sophistication. They hint at eras when knowledge surged far beyond what the surviving record suggests, only to be extinguished by catastrophe and rediscovered later as fragments. They reveal a world where the first builders were not primitive. They were inheritors. Imagine a craftsman thousands of years ago shaping a stone with techniques his ancestors once mastered fully, using tools whose original designs were long lost. He works with echoes of a knowledge that once belonged to a civilization wiped out by fire, water, or time. The tools he uses now are crude imitations of ancient brilliance, yet they still carry the ghost of precision. This is how memory degrades across cycles, not through deliberate forgetting, but through the simple erosion of survival. When catastrophe strikes, what remains is what can fit through the narrow passage of continuity. Much is lost. A few fragments endure, and in those fragments, the impossible hides. The underwater world deepens the anomaly further. Sonar scans of drowned plateaus reveal right angles, terraces, and symmetric foundations impossible to mistake for natural formations. Stone roads stretch into waters where no city should have existed. Pyramidal structures rise from the seabed like monuments exiled from time. These discoveries challenge the belief that early humans lacked the capability to build with such complexity. But they do not challenge it if we accept a different premise, that these structures belong to civilizations predating the last global inundation, civilizations whose coastlines now rest beneath hundreds of feet of water. Their disappearance was not gradual, it was abrupt, violent, total. And then there are the inscriptions, symbols found on artifacts from places supposedly disconnected until recent centuries. Spirals, solar disks, serpent patterns, geometric grids, and astronomical markers appear in South America, Africa, the Mediterranean, and Southeast Asia. These symbols echo each other with unnerving familiarity, not as if copied, but as if remembered from a common origin. They behave like linguistic fossils, fragments of a language older than the cultures that preserved them. If knowledge did pass across cycles, then symbols would be among the first to survive, easy to carve, easy to transmit, carrying meaning even when spoken words had been lost. These anomalies press against the boundaries of official history because they reveal a past too large, too complex, too cyclical to fit into the narrow window of the accepted narrative. They suggest that humanity did not climb from darkness into light, but rather clawed its way back toward illumination after each devastating fall. They suggest that what we call the dawn of civilization was not a beginning, but a recovery. Standing among these artifacts, you feel the gravity of the cycle tightening. Each object is a reminder that something once stood here before us, something capable of shaping stone with mastery, navigating oceans with precision, tracking the skies with knowledge we pretend was discovered only recently. These relics are the fingerprints of forgotten epochs. They are the echoes of hands that worked before the great waters rose, before the fires consumed, before the storms redrew the continents. And so, the narrative prepares to plunge deeper still. If the artifacts themselves are whispers of forgotten ages, then the cities now drowned beneath the oceans are entire chapters torn from the book of human history. They do not hide in layers of stone. They sleep beneath waves. In the next block, we descend into those submerged worlds, where the memory of the 6 lost civilizations waits in silence beneath the rising sea. The surface tension of the mystery deepens as we descend from the realm of forbidden artifacts into the waters that swallowed entire chapters of human history. The ocean has always been the great keeper of secrets, a boundary between what humanity remembers and what it was never meant to rediscover. Yet beneath those waves lie the clearest traces of the cycles, preserved not in scattered relics, but in entire drowned landscapes. And within those submerged worlds, the mythology of our ancestors begins to shift from metaphor to memory. Flood myths no longer feel symbolic. They feel documentary. They feel inherited. They feel like warnings carried across generations by people who had seen the world break before. The story of cataclysm is not unique to any culture. It is universal, repeating across continents with the same rhythm, the same fear, the same imagery of rising waters, fire falling from the sky, and teachers emerging after the devastation to rebuild what little remained. Mythology, when seen through this lens, becomes more than a system of belief. It becomes the encoded memory system of the human species, a narrative architecture designed to preserve the lessons of previous cycles in forms that could survive illiteracy, migration, and collapse. Myths are portable. They can be sung, carved, whispered, carried across storms and continents. And within them, patterns emerge that match the geological and archaeological record far too closely to dismiss as coincidence. Cultures separated by oceans describe eras of abundance followed by sudden destruction. They speak of giants, sages, luminous beings, and civilizations that ended when the sky changed. They recount floods that covered mountains, fires that consumed cities, and survivors led by figures who seemed to possess knowledge far greater than the people they guided. These are not isolated stories. They are a shared inheritance, a psychological map of the cycles. Consider the Mesopotamian flood narrative, older than the biblical one, describing sages who warned of the coming waters and preserved the seeds of civilization. Consider the tales of Viracocha in the Andes, teaching stone-cutting, astronomy, and law after a world-ending deluge. Consider the legends of oans emerging from the sea, offering writing and mathematics to early humans. Consider the Aboriginal Dreamtime stories recounting coastlines that once stretched far beyond their current boundaries, descriptions now confirmed by modern oceanography. These myths behave as if they are observational accounts told by people who witnessed a world transformed by catastrophe, and the consistency of these narratives suggests something profound. That mythology is the memory of the 6 civilizations lost before ours. The cosmologies of these cultures deepen the impression. They speak of ages, not a single beginning. They describe previous worlds destroyed and remade. They outline cycles of order and chaos, eras of light and shadow, each ending with catastrophe and renewal. The Maya counted epochs, not centuries. The Hindus described vast yugas, each ending in dissolution. The Greeks remembered ages of gold, silver, bronze, and iron, each declining, each replaced by another. These are not merely symbolic frameworks. They resemble attempts to track time across resets, to anchor human identity not to a single origin, but to a repeating pattern. And at the core of these cosmologies stands a recurring theme: the watchers, the teachers, the guides. They appear at the edges of catastrophe. They possess knowledge that seems both technological and spiritual. They understand the stars, the seasons, the geometry of the earth. They instruct humanity in rebuilding after destruction, shaping the foundations of each new civilization. Whether these figures were remnants of the previous age or something older still is a question mythology does not resolve, but their presence across cultures indicates that the survivors of each cycle did not wander blindly. They carried a lineage of memory, fragmented but essential, preserved by those who understood that knowledge was the only thing capable of transcending catastrophe. These myths also describe celestial order with a precision surprising for their supposed technological level. They track precession, solstices, eclipses, and planetary cycles that require long-term observation, impossible for nomadic or newly formed societies. This suggests the inheritance of astronomical knowledge from the civilizations erased by global resets. It implies that their cosmologies were not built from scratch, but reconstructed from the fragments of a much older understanding of the sky, one that may have guided navigation, construction, and survival before each collapse. Yet beneath the beauty of these mythologies lies a darker implication. If these stories preserve memories of previous destructions, then humanity has always lived with the shadow of recurrence. The cycles were not accidents. They were patterns. They returned with unsettling regularity. The myths warn of floods, fires, shifting skies, trembling ground. And they describe these events not as mythic morality tales, but as cosmic processes, the turning of a wheel that humanity could not escape, only endure. As the narratives of these ancient cultures echo across time, they form the foundation of a deeper understanding. They reveal a world where memory was sacred, because memory meant survival. They show that mythology was the vessel through which knowledge passed from one age to the next, carrying the essence of civilizations that would otherwise be forgotten. And they prepare us for the next layer of the cycle. For if mythology preserves the memory of past worlds, then the ruins they left behind must hold the physical imprint of that remembrance. In the next block, we rise from cosmology into civilization itself, tracing how early societies emerged with inexplicable sophistication, as if awakening not into discovery, but into remembrance of a world their ancestors had lost. From the mythologies that preserved ancestral memory, we step into the dawn of civilization, an awakening too abrupt, too synchronized, too sophisticated to belong to a species supposedly emerging from millennia of simple subsistence. As we cross this threshold, the world feels different. The terrain of the past grows sharper, more deliberate, as if shaped by hands guided not by trial and error, but by recollection. What rises in the archaeological record is not a slow climb, but a surge. Cities appear with planned grids. Irrigation systems emerge fully formed. Writing arrives not as scattered symbols, but as structured language. Astronomy manifests not as curiosity, but as calculation. The official narrative describes this as the birth of progress, but seen through the lens of the cycles, it looks like the activation of memory, as if the survivors of the last reset carried fragments of knowledge waiting for a world calm enough to receive them. Sumer does not behave like a first civilization. Its appearance is too sudden, its advances too dense. Within a single epoch, it reveals writing, standardized measurement, law, agriculture, and sophisticated religious structures aligned with celestial cycles. This is not the work of a population discovering civilization. It is the work of one rebuilding it. The same pattern emerges in Egypt, where the oldest stonework shows the highest precision, implying that the earliest builders possessed knowledge that later generations inherited but could not replicate. Civilizations should evolve toward complexity, yet here we see the opposite. Perfection lies at the beginning, not the end. This inversion only makes sense if the knowledge came from an earlier age, carried through catastrophe by a small number of survivors who remembered enough to guide reconstruction. In the Indus Valley, cities like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa rise with masterful urban planning, grid systems, plumbing, water control, standardized weights, yet their origins remain opaque. No gradual developmental arc, only maturity. And in the Andean world, the earliest megalithic construction demonstrates mastery of stone-fitting techniques, so precise they challenge modern engineering. Later cultures built atop these foundations with cruder methods, as if trying to imitate a forgotten template. The pattern repeats across continents. The oldest layer is the most advanced. Knowledge degrades, not emerges. Civilizations do not grow into brilliance. They awaken into it, then struggle to preserve it across generations. Even agriculture behaves like an inheritance. Evidence suggests simultaneous domestication of crops across distant regions, an impossibility without shared instruction or surviving memory. The shift from foraging to farming appears not as random experimentation, but as coordinated transformation. It is as though groups scattered by catastrophe carried fragments of agricultural knowledge and reactivated them when conditions allowed. These shifts align with post-cataclysmic stabilization periods, when climates cooled, oceans paused their advance, and the earth briefly steadied. Civilization blooms not when humans innovate, but when the planet stops punishing them long enough for inherited knowledge to take root. Ritual centers emerge next. Temples, observatories, pyramids, sanctuaries, each reflecting a worldview tied to celestial order. These structures appear before writing, metallurgy, or large-scale political organization in some regions, as if the first priority of a recovering world was to re-anchor itself to the heavens. This suggests that astronomical knowledge was not discovered by early civilizations. It was remembered, and the effort to rebuild these alignments implies that the survivors believed celestial cycles were tied to the catastrophes that ended previous ages. The sky was not a symbol of divinity, it was a clock. Alongside these physical structures, societal organization appears with equal suddenness. Legal codes, moral frameworks, trade networks, calendars, and standardized systems of exchange emerge as if summoned from some quiet internal archive. These frameworks require time and experimentation to form, yet they surface complete. Their uniformity across distant cultures suggests more than coincidence. It suggests parallel remembrance. The survivors of earlier cycles did not rebuild isolated. They carried a shared cosmological template dispersed across continents before the seas rose and separated them. What emerges from this convergence is a portrait of humanity, not as a species stumbling into civilization, but as one rediscovering an older rhythm. Early societies behave like communities guided by echoes, reconstructing what they sensed must exist, even if they no longer understood its origins. They built what they remembered. They formalized what they feared losing. And they passed these fragments of sophistication into the foundations of the seventh civilization, the one we now inhabit, while knowing that memory fades with each generation. Yet beneath this synchronized rise lies the tension of absence. We have the structures, but not the prototypes, the systems, but not the teachers, the precision, but not the developmental steps. Something is missing from the record, something that should exist if these civilizations truly originated from scratch. The void between their supposed beginnings and their undeniable mastery grows too large to overlook. And as the world's first cities stand as beacons of impossible emergence, another layer of evidence waits beneath them, carved not into myth or social structure, but into stone itself. These are the physical remnants of technologies and techniques so refined that later cultures treated them as sacred, not because they understood them, but because they knew they came from an age beyond their own. In the next block, we examine the ruins, those silent witnesses of forgotten craftsmanship that reveal a story older than our civilization, older than our histories, older than our collective memory. The ruins rise before us like frozen echoes, remnants of a world that understood stone not as a material to be shaped, but as a language to be spoken. As we step into this domain, the contradictions sharpen. The archaeological record becomes less an archive of human progress and more a battlefield between two timelines. The official one, neat and linear, and the older one, fractured but undeniable. The stones themselves hold no loyalty to either narrative. They simply stand where they have always stood, bearing the weight of ages that do not fit within the borders assigned to them. These ruins are not the work of cultures finding their footing. They are the remnants of civilizations that had already reached heights of engineering modern societies still struggle to replicate. They do not whisper of experimentation. They speak of mastery. Stand before the megaliths of Sacsayhuaman, and you feel the tension immediately. Massive stones, some weighing over 100 tons, interlock with such precision that not even a blade of grass can slip between their seams. Their edges curve in ways suggesting the stones were shaped to fit one another, not carved independently. These are not the marks of trial and error construction. They are signatures of an engineering language lost to time. Later cultures built on top of these foundations with smaller, cruder stones, inadvertently revealing the chronological inversion. The oldest layers are the most advanced. This is the fingerprint of a civilization rising not from ignorance but from memory, memory of techniques perfected before the last great reset. Travel across the world and the pattern repeats. At Baalbek, colossal stones weighing hundreds of tons rest in alignment that defies explanation. At Pumapunku, blocks bear grooves and cuts, as if shaped with tools capable of uniform precision and rapid material removal, techniques far beyond the capabilities attributed to the region's ancient inhabitants. In Egypt, the granite boxes of the Serapeum display interior surfaces polished to a degree approaching modern machining, their symmetry exact even in darkness. And beneath the pyramids themselves lie layers of construction so ancient that erosion marks suggest a time when the climate was entirely different. These relics do not behave as experiments. They behave as inheritance. Even more haunting is the global geometry of these structures. Many align to solstices, equinoxes, and stellar risings with accuracy so refined it would require generations of astronomical observation, unless the knowledge already existed. Their placements form geodesic grids that stretch across continents, as if the builders worked from a shared understanding of Earth's shape and energetic meridians. Cultures separated by oceans and millennia produced structures with the same angles, the same alignments, the same symbolic geometries. This is not cultural contagion. It is remembrance manifesting in stone. Artifacts uncovered within these ruins deepen the mystery. Stone spheres shaped with perfect sphericity, drill cores displaying spiral machining, vitrified surfaces suggesting extreme heat applied with intentional focus, all hint at technological capabilities the official timeline cannot accommodate. Yet these artifacts exist. They bear witness. They demand a broader view of what humanity once achieved. If a civilization possessed the ability to cut, shape, transport, and align megaliths with this level of precision, then it must have possessed a complex toolkit, one erased by catastrophe, but remembered through fragments of practice passed down to descendants who no longer understood their original context. Some ruins reveal another strange pattern, signs of reconstruction. Walls show layers of different techniques, as if built by cultures separated not by years, but by epochs. The oldest sections exhibit impossible craftsmanship. The middle layers reveal diminishing skill. The newest layers rely on rubble and mortar, humble repairs to structures whose original builders were long gone. This suggests that the survivors of a previous cycle encountered the ruins of their own ancestors from an even earlier age, attempting to preserve what remained without fully understanding its design. It is a recursion of memory, looping through time like an echo that grows fainter with each repetition. Even weathering patterns tell a cryptic story. Sphinx erosion points to rainfall far heavier than the climate of its accepted age. Megalithic surfaces bear marks of flooding and sediment deposition inconsistent with their supposed timelines. Some structures appear to have been violently displaced, as if shaken by global events capable of uprooting stone itself. These details align with the mythic accounts of world-ending catastrophes, suggesting that the ruins we see are not the pristine creations of flourishing cultures, but the surviving bones of civilizations that faced extinction. Walking among these stones, you sense a presence, not a being, but an intelligence distributed across ages, a memory embedded in geometry, a message encrypted in architecture. The ruins do not speak in words. They speak in craftsmanship, precision, and alignment. They tell a story of knowledge carried across cycles, a story of civilizations determined to leave behind anchors that could outlast fire, flood, and time itself. They preserved what they could, knowing that much would be lost. And yet, even these monumental remnants are not the deepest layer of evidence. Beneath the stones, beneath the cities, beneath the ruins themselves lies something even more telling: records, lists, seals, administrative artifacts that point to histories far longer and more complex than the official narrative allows. These archives reveal not just skill, but structure, not just memory, but governance. Traces of civilizations organized enough to document their world before it vanished. In the next block, we move from stone to record, stepping into the administrative evidence left behind by forgotten ages, clues that suggest entire timelines once existed before ours, recorded, erased, and waiting to be rediscovered. Beneath the monumental stones and the silent precision of megalithic ruins, another layer of evidence waits, less dramatic in appearance, yet far more unsettling in implication. Administrative artifacts, the quiet machinery of civilization, form a bridge between myth and engineering. They reveal societies not merely capable of building immense structures, but of organizing vast populations, tracking resources, regulating trade, preserving lineages, and recording time itself. These fragments of governance do not behave like the origins of bureaucracy. They behave like its reactivation. They feel inherited, as if drawn from a template refined in earlier ages and reassembled by survivors who remembered its shape even when the details had been lost. Clay tablets, seals, ledgers, king lists, astronomical charts. These objects carry a peculiar tension between sophistication and amnesia. They show mastery of language and mathematics, yet their origins appear suddenly, without the expected developmental evolution. Writing systems, instead of emerging from crude pictographs through slow refinement, arrive in the archaeological record already structured, already complex, as though the people who devised them were reconstructing something they once knew rather than inventing it anew. The earliest Sumerian cuneiform, for instance, does not resemble the experimental beginnings of a script. It resembles a memory, stabilized into form. One of the most troubling pieces of this puzzle is the Sumerian king list, a document that recounts rulers who reigned not for decades, but for thousands of years, reigns spanning epochs rather than lifetimes. Official interpretations consign these entries to myth, symbolic exaggeration, or literary flourish. Yet the pattern echoes across other cultures. Egyptian king lists hinting at pre-dynastic rulers whose timelines dissolve into deep antiquity. Mesoamerican accounts of previous suns, each populated by beings enduring far longer than human lifespans. Indian traditions enumerating yugas lasting tens of thousands of years. These records read less like fiction and more like fractured memory, attempts to reconcile human chronology with cycles far older than the societies preserving them. Administrative artifacts extend beyond lists into symbols of authority and measurement. Seals used for trade bear geometric motifs, matching those found in distant regions, suggesting a shared conceptual heritage predating the rise of isolated civilizations. Standardized weights appear abruptly, a sign of economic systems already mature. Calendars reflect knowledge of celestial cycles requiring centuries of observation, yet they surface at the earliest stages of each civilization. These are not the markers of cultures ascending from simplicity. They are the signatures of societies inheriting fragments of a lost systemic knowledge. Consider the sudden appearance of law codes. Hammurabi's stele stands as a monumental expression of justice, but its sophistication implies predecessors no longer visible. Legal systems do not spring into existence fully formed. They evolve through trial, conflict, and negotiation. Yet the earliest known codes already distinguish property rights, social classes, contractual obligations, and penalties calibrated with uncanny precision. It is as though the survivors of a previous age reconstructed a legal memory necessary for stability in the fragile years following catastrophe. Astronomical records deepen the mystery. Early civilizations tracked solstices, lunar cycles, and planetary motions with accuracy rivaling modern calculations. The Babylonian MUL. Apian tablets catalog celestial phenomena requiring generations of uninterrupted observation. And yet, these tablets appear in societies supposedly just emerging from primitive conditions. This contradiction dissolves if we consider that the observers were not beginning a new tradition, but restoring one interrupted by the destruction of their predecessors. In Egypt, the Palermo stone lists dynasties extending past the limits of archaeological verification, implying a historical depth exceeding the accepted timeline. In the Indus Valley, seals bear undeciphered symbols that resemble ideographic systems older than writing itself. In Mesoamerica, codices record astronomical ages stretching back into epochs described as previous worlds. These records do not fit the shape of linear history. They fit the contours of a cycle, the attempt of each civilization to document remnants of a world they no longer fully understood, but felt compelled to preserve. Even accounting practices suggest inheritance. The use of base 60 in Mesopotamia, still reflected in our measurement of time, hints at a mathematical legacy predating the cultures credited with formalizing it. The sophistication of their calculations implies a continuity of knowledge rather than spontaneous innovation. How does a society transition from primitive subsistence to advanced mathematical abstraction without an intermediate stage? The cycle offers a simple answer. They did not start from zero. What emerges from this administrative evidence is a portrait of cultures rebuilding themselves with fragments of a prior order. They are stabilizing the aftermath of catastrophe, not inventing civilization from scratch. Their records feel like attempts to reconstruct coherence in a world that had experienced rupture. They are catalogs of memory, encoded in clay, stone, and symbol, each line hinting at something older behind it. But the most human pieces of this archive, stories of rulers, inscriptions of triumph and loss, seals bearing the marks of individuals, speak not only of systems, but of people. People caught between remembrance and forgetting. People living in the shadow of ages, erased. And it is here, in this tension between personal narrative and civilizational inheritance, that the next layer emerges. Behind the administrative artifacts lies the humanity of the cycle, the individuals whose lives carried echoes of a past they could barely name, yet could never fully escape. In the next block, we turn toward the human element, stepping into the emotional and psychological world of those who lived through the early cycle's aftermath, shaping new civilizations while haunted by memories of the ones that came before. From the ledgers and king lists, from the seals pressed into clay by long-forgotten hands, we move now into the lives behind those marks, into the people who inherited the weight of a world rebuilt from fragments. Civilizations do not rise through structures alone. They rise through the instincts, fears, dreams, and memories of individuals who carry echoes of catastrophes they did not personally witness, but somehow remember. This is where the cycle becomes human. This is where the forgotten ages stop feeling distant and begin breathing through the choices of those who lived in the shadow of loss. The early figures of each new civilization, scribes, builders, astronomers, navigators, healers, behave not like pioneers exploring new frontiers, but like refugees rebuilding what they sensed once existed. Their actions reveal urgency, not discovery. They labor as though racing against time, as though aware that memory fades faster than stone can be carved. Imagine the first generation after a cataclysm. Children grow hearing stories not of triumph, but of survival. Elders describe a world of light, order, and mastery swallowed by waters or darkness. They speak of cities now lost beneath the sea, of stars that shifted in the sky, of a sun that once rose differently. These tales imprint themselves on young minds, shaping instincts that do not align with their surroundings. A child learns to observe the horizon for signs of rising water. Another learns to track the sun with precision, sensing that celestial cycles hold deeper meaning. These are not normal behaviors for people at the beginning of civilization. They are the inherited reflexes of descendants of collapse. Among these early communities, individuals emerge who carry the strongest echoes of the past. Those who become the first astronomers, the first surveyors, the first keepers of ritual. They are drawn to patterns they do not fully understand, as if remembering without remembering. An apprentice builder shapes stone with an ease that surprises even him, hands guided by instincts passed down from ancestors who once mastered techniques now lost. A poet composes verses describing cities she has never seen but feels in her bones. A navigator senses ocean currents with a familiarity that defies explanation. These people do not invent their abilities, they access them, drawing from the silent reservoir of inherited memory. Over time, these individuals become legends, culture heroes, demigods, sages, whose knowledge seems to transcend their era. Later generations mythologize them, transforming memory into symbol. But beneath the embellishment lies a profound truth. Civilization advances because certain individuals awaken fragments of what once existed. Their brilliance is not anomaly, but inheritance. They become the conduits through which the past reasserts itself, guiding societies towards structures and systems echoing those of forgotten ages. Yet the emotional burden of this inheritance is immense. These figures often feel out of place, haunted by visions they cannot contextualize. A priest watching the stars senses an impending shift, though he cannot articulate why. A healer knows remedies passed down through oral tradition, but wonders about their true origin. A governor struggles with decisions guided by instincts that seem older than the city he leads. Their lives unfold under the weight of something vast and unresolved. They live in the tension between memory and amnesia, carrying echoes strong enough to guide but too faint to explain. This resonance shapes entire cultures. Rituals develop not from superstition, but from attempts to encode memory into repeatable forms. Ceremonies reenact fragments of catastrophes or migrations. Songs describe celestial alignments with uncanny precision. Dances imitate the movement of water rising or fire descending. These cultural expressions are not simply artistic. They are mnemonic devices, crafted to preserve what little survived the collapse of the previous cycle. Through them, communities maintain a tether to a past they know only through inherited fear and awe. Even language bears the imprint of these echoes. Words for light, water, fire, and sky carry dual meanings, referencing both natural phenomena and cosmic events from ages lost. Terms for rulers and sages often imply guidance through darkness, as if every leader's role is shaped by an ancient memory of world-ending transitions. These linguistic shadows hint that the trauma of prior cycles embedded itself into the very structure of human communication. As centuries pass, these inherited memories begin to thin. The urgency fades. The emotional clarity blurs. What was once memory becomes myth, then tradition, then superstition. But the earliest figures, the ones closest to the cataclysm, live with sharper edges. They feel the cycle like a tremor beneath their feet. They know, even if they cannot articulate it, that civilization is not a straight ascent, but a fragile reconstruction. They sense that stability is temporary, that the world can shift again, that the sky can change. Their actions, driven by motivation they cannot fully name, shape the foundations of the societies that follow. They carve monuments, align structures to stars, record events in the simplest durable forms. They attempt to anchor memory into the future. But anchoring memory is not enough when the cycle's turning point approaches. And within every civilization, even the earliest ones, there comes a moment when the fragile balance between remembrance and forgetting breaks. Trauma does not remain confined to myths. It manifests again, reshaping lives and societies with the same force that once remade continents. In the next block, we step into that threshold, the turning point where personal burden becomes collective crisis, where memory and catastrophe intertwine, and where the seventh civilization begins to sense the shadow that ended the six before it. And so we approach the quiet precipice where remembrance becomes fear, where the echoes carried by individuals begin to resonate through entire societies. The early civilizations, still young but built upon the buried scaffolding of older worlds, move forward with a confidence that masks a deeper unease. Their monuments rise, their calendars stabilize, their trade networks expand. Yet beneath this visible ascent, something begins to stir, an undercurrent of tension encoded not in documents or rituals, but in the subconscious memory of a species that has survived cycles of collapse. Trauma travels through time in ways stone cannot. It permeates instinct, shaping reactions long before conscious thought can intervene. And in this fragile balance between inherited resilience and unspoken dread, the seventh civilization reaches its first great turning point. It begins subtly, with signs that seem too scattered to draw together. Astronomers notice slight deviations in celestial patterns they assumed eternal. Farmers observe anomalies in seasonal cycles. Priests report dreams filled with rising waters, trembling earth, darkened skies. At first, these warnings feel personal, isolated, easily dismissed. But as they intensify, a quiet panic spreads through the communities built atop the ruins of previous ages. These people, though unaware of the vast cycles guiding their fate, feel an instinctual tightening, an ancestral memory of thresholds crossed before. Their world, still fragile, responds like a body recalling old wounds. Conflicts arise where cooperation once flourished. Leaders, driven by both ambition and fear, begin consolidating power in hopes of stabilizing societies they sense are vulnerable. Laws become stricter, borders harden, rituals grow more elaborate, as if complexity could ward off chaos. Yet beneath these efforts lies an unspoken truth. They are responding not to present danger, but to ancient memory, an echo of the catastrophes that erased the 6 civilizations before them. Within individuals, this tension manifests as crisis. The astronomer who once felt only awe when observing the heavens now feels dread as alignments shift in ways he cannot predict. The architect who once built with confidence now questions the permanence of stone. The storyteller who once recited myths of past destruction with emotional distance now feels those stories tightening around her, as if they were prophecies rather than history. These figures stand at the intersection of knowledge and instinct, sensing that the world is not as stable as their emerging civilization believes. This unease becomes woven into the emotional fabric of entire populations. Dreams grow darker, rituals grow heavier. Children ask questions their parents cannot answer. Elders speak of signs they hoped never to see again. Even the land seems unsettled, rivers shifting courses, animals altering migrations, storms gathering with unfamiliar force. The official records mark these events as anomalies, but the human heart recognizes them as warnings. Trauma does not fade simply because time moves forward. It lingers, waiting for conditions that mirror its origin. And then comes the moment where the tension becomes undeniable. A series of disasters, minor on their own but too synchronized to ignore, sweep across regions. Floods in valleys long thought safe, earthquakes in areas considered stable, volcanic murmurs beneath mountains silent for generations. These events may not be catastrophic yet, but they awaken memory, deep memory, of cycles turning. Suddenly, the myths that once felt distant become immediate. The stories of ancient floods, fires, and darkness no longer belong to ancestral worlds. They belong to the present. This realization fractures societies. Some turn inward, clinging to tradition as a shield against uncertainty. Others turn outward, seeking new knowledge to explain the growing instability. A few attempt to decipher the ancient monuments, believing they hold clues to the past's forgotten catastrophes. But most simply endure, carried by instinct and fear, unable to articulate the magnitude of what they sense, but unable to escape its pull. The emotional strain magnifies the social one. Factions emerge, each offering a different interpretation of the signs. Some preach that the world is entering a sacred renewal. Others warn of approaching doom. Still others deny that anything is happening at all, clinging to stability even as the ground shifts beneath them. These divisions weaken the fragile cohesion of early civilizations, making them more vulnerable to the threats approaching from beyond human control. Through all of this, a quiet truth becomes clear. The 7th civilization has reached the same threshold, the 6th, before it once faced. A moment when progress is overshadowed by unease, when memory tries to warn, but language falls short, when the world prepares to turn the wheel once more. Whether catastrophe is imminent or merely approaching is unknown, but the sense of inevitability grows, spreading across minds and landscapes alike. This is the turning point, the subtle yet profound crisis that marks the beginning of the next phase in the cycle, a phase where humanity must confront not only external forces, but the internal legacy of ages lost. And as this realization deepens, the path ahead leads away from cities and records into the wilderness beyond the known world. In the next block, the story shifts toward journey, toward the epic quest that carries individuals across boundaries of land and myth, seeking answers hidden in the remnants of civilizations erased long before their own, the tension that gathered in the previous age, the quiet dread threading through early cities and whispered in temples under torchlight, eventually pushes a few individuals to step beyond the borders of what their civilization considers known. Every cycle produces such figures, not heroes in the mythic sense, but witnesses moved by instinct rather than ambition. Something calls them a pull older than language, drawing them toward the edges of maps and the limits of comprehension. It is a journey born of unease, yet guided by a strange familiarity, as if the path ahead has been walked before by ancestors whose footsteps were buried by catastrophe. These travelers leave behind the comforts of structured life to seek answers the world cannot provide within its settled centers. They move not toward discovery, but toward remembrance. At first, the landscapes they cross appear ordinary: fertile valleys, riverbanks busy with trade, mountain passes shaped by wind and time. Yet, as they push farther, the world begins to shift. Familiar markers vanish, settlements grow sparse. The silence of wilderness spreads like a vast, unbroken memory. In these remote spaces, nature holds on to traces of the cycles with a tenacity that stone cities cannot. Rivers carve canyons through layers of forgotten epochs. Glaciers expose relics older than the civilizations that mapped them. Ancient coastlines emerge like ghosts beneath cliffs. Each step toward these regions feels like peeling back a layer of time. Eventually, the travelers encounter the outskirts of ruins unknown to their own culture, structures older than myth, shaped by hands long dissolved into dust. Some lie half-buried in sediment from floods that reshaped continents. Others stand exposed on high plateaus, eroded yet unmistakably artificial. The explorers feel a strange recognition, not of the details, but of the intention behind the stone. The geometry aligns with patterns their own civilization barely understands. The orientation echoes astronomical cycles they learned as children. It is as though they have stumbled upon a memory their world forgot how to read. Among these ruins, they search for inscriptions, carvings, or artifacts that might illuminate their origins. What they find is fragmentary but consistent. Symbols that match those from faraway lands. Tools fashioned with techniques their own craftsmen cannot replicate. Ceilings blackened by fires predating their cities. Stone surfaces melted, as if by heat too intense for volcanic activity. Each discovery deepens the mystery while affirming a singular truth. These structures were not made by primitives. They were the remnants of a civilization older and more advanced than their own. Compelled by both awe and fear, the travelers push onward into regions rarely visited. They climb ridges scarred by ancient earthquakes, cross plains where fossils mingle with human-shaped tools, and navigate coastlines reshaped by rising seas. The world they traverse feels wounded, marked by catastrophes powerful enough to reset the course of humanity. And yet, in certain places, the land carries a quiet stillness, an echo of a time when knowledge harmonized with the natural world rather than competing with it. As the quest deepens, they encounter other wanderers, nomads, hermits, survivors of forgotten communities, people who carry fragments of stories preserved nowhere else. These individuals speak of lost ages when the sky burned or the oceans rose with unstoppable force. They recount generations living in fear of repeating cycles, building their lives around signs from the heavens. Some carry relics passed down through countless ancestors, objects too finely crafted for any living artisan. These encounters give the travelers a sense that their journey is not random. It is part of a far older tradition, a pilgrimage echoing through the cycles. The path eventually leads them to the threshold of a place whispered about in scattered legends, a region said to hold the bones of the first world. It is not a city, but a convergence of geological and architectural anomalies. Monoliths arranged in patterns following celestial arcs. Caverns carved by hands yet older than recorded history. Terraces submerged beneath silt layers from floods no living person remembers. The air carries a weight, as though the land itself is aware of their presence. In this place, the explorers confront a truth that had only been implied until now. The ruins they have encountered do not belong to one lost civilization, but to several, layered across time like pages in a buried book. Each cycle left behind structures, artifacts, and scars. Each attempted to preserve fragments of knowledge, and each was erased before achieving permanence. The travelers feel the weight of these revelations press against their minds, pushing them toward questions their culture never dared to ask. Yet something else awaits them here, something living, though perhaps not in the ordinary sense. A presence exists in these remote regions, a figure neither myth nor ghost, but a keeper of memory woven into the cycles themselves. Every age has recorded stories of such beings, teachers emerging after catastrophe, watchers guiding survivors, wanderers appearing in times of upheaval. Whether human, ancestral, or something in between, they serve as bridges between worlds forgotten and worlds yet to come. The travelers sense this presence before they see it. A shift in the wind, a silence deeper than any they have known, a feeling of being observed not with judgment, but with recognition. They stand at the edge of revelation, poised to meet a witness of the cycles, a keeper who has endured what civilizations could not. In the next block, this figure steps from the margins of myth into the path of the explorers, revealing secrets carried across ages and offering insight into the catastrophes that shape the world they know. They sense him before they understand what they are sensing. A presence, ancient, yet unmistakably human, moving through the landscape with the quiet certainty of someone who has walked these paths across more than one lifetime. The travelers, exhausted, awestruck, still carrying the weight of the ruins behind them, feel the air shift as though knowledge itself has turned to face them. Legends from their childhood speak of figures like this: the wanderer, the first teacher, the survivor, the keeper of secrets. Names differ from valley to valley, but the silhouette is always the same: an ageless being who appears when the world approaches a turning point, bearing fragments of memory no civilization has managed to preserve in full. They had dismissed such tales as myth, yet now, standing at the threshold of an ancient convergence site, they find myth looking back at them. He does not arrive with spectacle. He emerges from the shadow of a weathered monolith, footsteps soft, posture measured, eyes carrying an unsettling calm. His appearance is human, yet his presence conveys a depth beyond any person they have known. It feels like standing before a living archive, someone who carries within him the sediment of countless eras, the memories of cities swallowed by the sea and empires erased by fire. When he speaks, his voice holds the cadence of many languages at once, as if tuned by centuries of shifting tongues. And though his words are simple, the weight behind them is immense. He tells them that the land they stand upon has witnessed more rises and falls than their civilization dares imagine. He speaks of floods that rewrote the coastlines, of winters that dimmed the sky for years, of firestorms that swept across continents. His stories do not sound like mythology. They sound like testimony. The travelers listen in silence, sensing that this figure has seen the cycles from their beginnings to their ends. He does not claim divinity. He claims memory. He claims survival. And that alone is enough to unsettle everything they thought they knew. He leads them deeper into the convergence site, where monoliths form patterns matching constellations lost to precession. He explains that each arrangement marks an age a cycle, and each cycle a warning. Stone, he says, was chosen not for worship, but for permanence, because knowledge must be anchored in something the earth cannot easily swallow. Yet the cataclysms that reshaped the planet were sometimes too powerful even for stone, leaving only fragments for future civilizations to misinterpret. He traces symbols on the rock, spirals, serpents, intersecting lines, explaining how they represent the motion of the heavens during times of upheaval. He speaks not of prophecy, but of memory encoded into geometry. The travelers ask him what caused these collapses, why each civilization rose only to be erased. His answer is not simple. Some cycles ended through natural forces, shifting poles, volcanic winters, great meteors, sudden meltwater floods. Others ended when knowledge outpaced wisdom, when societies expanded faster than the earth could sustain, when power concentrated into hands incapable of seeing the larger rhythm. But most cycles, he says, ended through a convergence of factors, cosmic, geological, human, all aligning in a pattern that felt inevitable only in retrospect. He speaks of the first civilization, one whose traces are nearly gone, buried beneath layers of rock and ocean. It was the most advanced, he says, not in technology, but in its understanding of the cycles. They studied the stars not out of curiosity, but out of necessity. Yet even they misread the signs. Their fall was catastrophic enough to reset nearly everything, leaving the survivors scattered across continents, carrying fragments of knowledge they could barely comprehend. These fragments became the seeds of the 6 civilizations that followed. As he recounts each age, the travelers sense that he is not merely describing history, he is reliving it. His eyes dim when he speaks of cities drowned within a single season. His breath tightens when he recalls winters that lasted a generation. His voice softens when he describes the first survivors emerging from caves and highlands, uncertain whether the world could sustain life again. He remembers because he lived through it. If not in a biological sense, then in a lineage of memory passed through an unbroken chain of keepers stretching back to the earliest cycle. Whether he is one man living far beyond normal limits, or one in a succession of guardians trained to preserve forbidden knowledge is unclear. What matters is that the memory survived, and he is its vessel. He tells the travelers that their civilization, the 7th, stands at a familiar crossroads. The signs they have observed, the shifting seasons, the trembling ground, the uneasy sky, mirror those that preceded previous collapses. He does not say catastrophe is certain. He never deals in certainties. He speaks instead of patterns, of alignments, of murmurs in the earth. He warns that cycles do not guarantee destruction, but they demand awareness. And awareness has always been the difference between survival and erasure. Yet when the travelers ask him what they must do, he does not give them instructions. He says only that knowledge must return to the world, and more importantly, that it must be understood. For no civilization has ever fallen solely due to external forces. Collapse begins when memory fails, when people forget the warnings encoded in stone, in myth, in instinct, when they stop listening. A silence settles over the convergent site. The travelers feel as though they are standing at the hinge of time, one foot in the world they knew and one in the world that preceded it. The keeper's presence makes the boundary between past and present thin enough to touch. They feel the weight of responsibility, not for themselves alone, but for the entire 7th civilization, which now seems far more fragile than they once believed. But the keeper of secrets does not reveal everything. There are truths he withholds, truths he says can only be understood after confronting what lies at the heart of every cycle, the great undoing, the event that resets the world and forces humanity to begin again. In the next block, he leads them to the memory of that event, to the cataclysm that ended the previous age, the disaster so vast that its echo still shapes the bones of the earth and the fears of the human mind. He brings them to the edge of a chasm, a vast rupture in the earth where stone hangs torn and exposed, as though the land itself had been ripped open by an impossible force. The wind that rises from below is cold, unnaturally so, carrying with it the scent of minerals untouched since the world was young. The travelers feel a tightening in their chests as they follow the keeper toward the precipice, sensing they are approaching the memory he had warned them about, the memory that sits at the core of every cycle. Here, in this scar carved into the planet, the great cataclysm still breathes. It is not metaphor, it is not myth. It is the echo of an event so immense that even the earth could not fully bury its remains. The keeper stands upon the ledge and speaks softly, as though addressing the abyss itself. He tells them that the previous civilization, one whose traces they have glimpsed only through ruins and symbols, did not end slowly. It ended in a single chain of events that unfolded too quickly for even the most prepared to withstand. He describes the sky darkening over days, then weeks, until sunlight thinned into a bruised glow. He recalls ash drifting across continents, oceans rising with violent acceleration, storms tearing apart coastlines, and winds carrying the heat of distant fires. These were not isolated disasters. They were converging forces, each amplifying the next until the world became unrecognizable. The travelers listen, struggling to reconcile the calm presence of the man before them with the devastation he recounts. He explains that the cataclysm began with a celestial disturbance, a passing body, a shift in the magnetic field, a series of solar eruptions. The exact trigger is lost to time. What matters is that the planet's balance fractured, ice melted with terrifying speed, pressure built within the crust. Oceans, seeking new equilibrium, surged toward the land, and the civilization of the sixth cycle, advanced in ways the travelers can scarcely imagine, found itself powerless against forces that moved faster than its understanding. He describes cities illuminated by technologies now lost, swallowed in a single night. He recalls towers collapsing into the sea, their light extinguished as though the earth had inhaled them. He speaks of firestorms, not from war, but from atmospheric ignition, natural reactions to a world thrown into chaos. Some regions burned, others drowned, others froze. It was not one disaster, it was all of them, layered and overlapping. The planet convulsed, and humanity, despite its brilliance, was reduced to scattered remnants, seeking refuge in mountains, caves, and high plateaus. The travelers feel the enormity of his words settling over them like ash. This was no localized tragedy. It was global, unavoidable, and swift. And yet, he says, even in the heart of destruction, there were those who remembered. Survivors carried knowledge through the darkness, preserving fragments of astronomy, engineering, agriculture, and language. They became the ancestors of the seventh civilization, the world the travelers come from. But memory fades after each reset. What begins as testimony becomes myth, then symbol, then misunderstanding. By the time stability returns, the new civilization believes it is the first. He kneels beside a fractured stone at the chasm's edge, brushing away dust to reveal carvings so worn they seem woven into the rock itself. Spirals representing the turning of cycles, lines marking celestial paths, symbols depicting fire and water converging. These were warnings left by the previous age, though too few survived long enough to decipher them. The travelers recognize shapes similar to those they saw in ruins far from here, suddenly understanding that these symbols were not ornamental, they were instructions, messages, summaries of a disaster that erased nearly everything. The keeper tells them that the survivors of the sixth civilization attempted to preserve far more than symbols. They built vaults in mountains, encoded records into crystal and metal, and constructed structures aligned to astronomical cycles they believed would predict future catastrophes. But time, erosion, war, and ocean rise consumed most of their efforts. Only fragments remain, scattered across continents like pieces of a puzzle humanity no longer knows how to assemble. A tremor shakes the chasm, subtle but unmistakable. Dust cascades from the walls. The travelers step back instinctively, but the keeper remains still, as though accustomed to the land's restless shifting. He explains that even now, long after the cataclysm that ended founded the Sixth Age, the Earth remains unsettled. Cycles leave scars not only on civilizations but on the planet itself, and those scars sometimes stir before the next turning of the wheel. The travelers ask him whether such a disaster could happen again. His answer is quiet, almost tender. Not a prediction, not a threat, only a recognition of pattern. He says that cycles do not repeat with precision, but with rhythm. Some are turbulent, some pass gently, but none leave the world unchanged. The seventh civilization, he reminds them, has already begun to feel the tremors, both literal and metaphorical, that mark the beginning of transition. As he speaks, the travelers feel a chilling realization. They are not just hearing history, they are standing inside its unfinished echo. The cataclysm that ended the last age is not simply a lesson, it is a mirror. But before they can process this, the keeper's tone shifts. He tells them there is something worse than catastrophe, something every civilization encounters when facing the remnants of a world it cannot fully comprehend. He calls it the unreachable truth, the knowledge that lies just beyond human capacity, the revelation that no society has ever managed to face without fracturing. And in the next block, they will face that truth, the failure that haunts every cycle, the understanding that comes too late, the existential blow from which even the strongest civilizations struggle to recover. The wind shifts as they leave the chasm behind, carrying with it a hollow stillness that feels heavier than anything they have encountered. The keeper walks ahead in silence now, as though preparing them for a truth words cannot easily hold. The travelers follow, each step echoing with the memory of the cataclysm he revealed. But what weighs on them more than destruction is the implication that even vast knowledge and breathtaking advancement could not save the sixth civilization. Something deeper must have failed, something fundamental, something that every age before theirs had confronted and every age had failed to overcome. The keeper had called it the unreachable truth. And as they move across a barren expanse toward a stone plateau carved with symbols no living person can read, they sense that this truth is not a matter of facts or artifacts, but of human limitations. They arrive at the crest of the plateau as the sun sinks low, casting elongated shadows across etchings smoothed by millennia. The carvings form a geometric map, not of land or stars, but of cycles, patterns curling inward toward a point marked by a broken spiral. The keeper kneels beside it and traces the fractured line with a solemn finger. He tells them that every civilization, no matter how advanced, eventually reaches a threshold in its understanding. This threshold is not technological, it is existential. It appears when a society begins to comprehend the enormity of the cycles, the possibility that time is not a ladder but a wheel, that progress may be temporary, and that survival does not guarantee permanence. Most civilizations can accept catastrophe. What they cannot accept is insignificance. He explains that the sixth civilization, brilliant and expansive, reached this threshold with remarkable speed. They mapped the stars with precision rivaling modern instruments. They understood the rhythms of the Earth's magnetic field, the patterns of climate fluctuation, the tectonic pulses that heralded change. They even deciphered remnants of knowledge from cycles older than their own, records preserved in stone, metal, and crystalline memory. Yet the more they learned, the more they realized how small they were in the face of cosmic rhythm. Their mastery made them confident, but their understanding made them afraid. Knowledge illuminated not control, but vulnerability. The travelers listen, unsettled by the thought that intelligence could become a burden heavier than ignorance. The keeper describes how the sixth civilization sought answers beyond the physical world, venturing into inquiries of consciousness, energy, and time itself. They believed that hidden laws governed the cycles, laws they could harness, perhaps even alter. For a while, this pursuit brought unity and purpose. Scholars, engineers, mystics, and leaders worked side by side, sharing discoveries with a fervor unmatched in any age. But as their theories deepened, contradictions emerged. Observations diverged. Interpretations split. Some believed the cycles were natural, Others believed they were influenced by celestial beings or forces beyond comprehension. Some thought humanity could escape the pattern. Others believed resistance would only hasten catastrophe. These divisions fractured their unity. Rival groups formed, each convinced it held the key to survival. Some turned inward, seeking answers in the mind, in memory, in the layers of human consciousness that seemed older than biology. Others turned outward, building colossal machines intended to stabilize the Earth's magnetic field or redirect cosmic influences. The most desperate sought to leave the planet altogether, convinced that escape was the only path to freedom. None saw that these divisions were the first cracks in their foundation, cracks widening even as the world around them trembled. The unreachable truth, the keeper says, is not the cycles themselves, but the revelation that no civilization, not even the most advanced, has ever succeeded in comprehending the full scope of the pattern. The mind recoils from concepts too large, too old, too vast. The attempt to grasp them leads not to clarity, but to fragmentation. Once a society realizes it is not the apex of history, but a temporary expression within an ancient recurrence, fear infiltrates its core. The sixth civilization, for all its brilliance, could not withstand this psychological pressure. They tried to outrun the cycle, to overpower it, to transcend it. In doing so, they accelerated their own unraveling. They lost cohesion, trust, purpose, long before the physical cataclysm struck. The travelers feel this truth settling into their bones. It is not destruction that ends civilizations. It is the shattering of meaning. The keeper explains that when a society becomes aware of its place in the cycle but lacks the wisdom to interpret it, despair takes root. Some give up on the future. Others cling to false certainty. Others wage conflicts over interpretations of the past. Fragmentation weakens the collective ability to respond to actual danger. By the time the sixth civilization faced the final catastrophe, they were no longer united. The wheel turned, and they lacked the strength to turn with it. The travelers look out across the plateau, feeling the weight of this revelation pressing against their minds. They understand now why memory fades across cycles, not because knowledge is lost, but because humanity cannot bear the full truth intact. The unreachable truth is not about the world. It is about themselves. They realize that they too have begun this journey of comprehension, stepping into a realm where the stability of meaning dissolves. They feel the edges of disorientation creeping in, the sense that their understanding of history, identity, and purpose has been shattered, and for a moment they fear the same fate that befell the sixth civilization. The keeper watches them with compassion, as though he expected this reaction. He reminds them that the goal is not to grasp the entire cycle. No mind can. The goal is to navigate the fragments with humility, to accept the limits of understanding, to find strength not in certainty but in awareness. He warns them that the next steps will challenge them even more, for knowing the truth is one burden, but returning to the world with it is another. Civilizations resist such knowledge. Minds resist it. Entire societies have crumbled under far less. Yet before the travelers can ask how they are meant to carry this truth back to their people, the keeper rises and points toward the horizon. There, faint against the fading light, stand remnants of structures nearly swallowed by the earth, markers left by those who attempted to bridge the divide between comprehension and collapse. These ruins contain the next clues they must face. But the keeper's expression darkens as he turns back to them. He tells them that the next stage is where every civilization falters, where investigation turns from revelation to distortion, where theories collide with reality, and where the mind, desperate for answers it cannot fully hold, begins shaping truths into illusions. In the next block, the story shifts toward interpretation, toward the theories that emerge in the aftermath of revelation, the distortions that haunt every age, and the human struggle to make meaning where certainty cannot exist. They descend from the plateau with the unreachable truth still reverberating through their thoughts, a weight that does not settle but continues to shift within them like an unfamiliar gravity. The keeper moves at a steady pace, neither urging them forward nor slowing to comfort them. He knows what unfolds now is not a matter of guidance, but interpretation. Once a civilization glimpses the vastness behind the cycle, it inevitably begins to reshape that glimpse into something it can bear. The travelers feel this happening within themselves, instincts trying to reorganize the enormity into something comprehensible. The mind, confronted with truths too large, begins crafting stories, frameworks, and theories that offer the illusion of containment. It is here, the keeper had warned, that civilizations begin to fracture, not from ignorance, but from interpretation. As they approach the scattered ruins on the horizon, the landscape becomes a mosaic of broken structures, toppled pillars, and half-buried chambers. These remnants belong not to the sixth civilization, but to the early attempts of survivors to understand what had happened to them. Each collapsed monument, each carved symbol, each abandoned observatory marks a different attempt to explain the cycle. Some are geometric, some astronomical, some deeply spiritual. They do not agree with one another. They never did. This, the keeper says, is where pantheons were born, not from imagination, but from the human attempt to humanize the forces that shaped the world. He leads them to a stone circle etched with figures representing celestial beings, serpents of the sky, guardians of fire, architects of the deep. These were not literal gods, he explains, but interpretations of natural and cosmic forces survivors could not comprehend. When the cycle turned and the world remade itself, the raw memory of catastrophe became story, and story became deity. Each figure in this circle represents a force the ancients struggled to describe. The shifting magnetic field, the rising seas, the cooling atmosphere, the sudden darkness that spread across continents. Over generations, these interpretations solidified into pantheons. Civilizations began to worship the cycle rather than understand it. The travelers traced the carvings, realizing that these so-called gods reflect not supernatural beings but patterns, each deity a personified echo of cosmic mechanics. A storm god symbolizing atmospheric upheaval, a serpent god representing the oscillation of the Earth's axis, a sun deity marking solar cycles and energetic surges. In this light, the pantheons of ancient cultures appear not as mythology, but as encoded science, filtered through the limitations of trauma and memory. The keeper tells them that every advanced civilization eventually deconstructs its pantheon, realizing that its gods are metaphors for forces that govern the rise and fall of worlds. But by the time this understanding emerges, the cycle is already turning again. Wisdom arrives too late. They move deeper into the ruins, approaching a structure that resembles an ancient observatory. Its pillars align with specific points on the horizon where celestial bodies once rose or set during critical moments in the cycle. The keeper explains that survivors of the sixth civilization attempted to rebuild their understanding of the heavens, believing that if they could track the rhythms precisely, they might anticipate the next turning. This was the beginning of astronomy as we know it, less a science of stars and more a desperate attempt to predict survival. Yet their calculations were incomplete, their instruments fragile, and their interpretations shaped by fear. Their theories diverged wildly. Some saw salvation in the sky, others saw doom. Both were incomplete. The travelers feel a growing recognition as the keeper describes these divisions. They see their own civilization reflected in these ancient attempts, the factions forming, the competing explanations, the need to fit the incomprehensible into categories the mind can manage. He explains that this fracturing of interpretation is not accidental. It is intrinsic to the cycle. When confronted with cosmic rhythms too vast to grasp, civilizations splinter into symbolic, mathematical, theological, and mechanical explanations. Each holds a fragment of truth, but none holds the whole. When these fragments clash, unity dissolves. Yet not all interpretations were misguided. Some survivors recognized that the pantheons were metaphors. They began studying the deeper forces behind the stories, seeking the underlying mechanics. They built instruments to measure magnetic drift. They charted the slow wobble of Earth's axis. They recorded fluctuations in solar output. They understood that the gods were not literal beings, but archetypes representing interactions between Earth and sky. These thinkers formed secret circles, passing knowledge through encoded symbols hidden in temples, monuments, and oral traditions. Their work preserved the most accurate understanding of the cycles, though even they could never grasp the full scope. The travelers stand among these remnants, realizing that humanity has always struggled to interpret forces larger than itself. The pantheons of old were attempts to give shape to the shapeless. The scientific inquiries of later ages were attempts to quantify what had once been symbolized. And yet, both approaches fell short. The keeper tells them that this is the paradox of the cycle. Wisdom expands, but so does uncertainty. Knowledge deepens, but so do the questions. The more humanity understands, the more it confronts the unreachable truth, that no civilization has ever managed to comprehend the entire mechanism of the wheel. He explains that the seventh civilization is no different. Its pantheon has taken new forms: data, energy, technology, progress. Its interpretations are scientific rather than mythic, yet the fragmentation persists. Competing theories about climate, cosmic influence, and planetary change mirror the ancient divisions carved into the stones around them. The same instinct to interpret, categorize, and assert certainty continues. And once again, humanity risks mistaking its interpretations for truth. The travelers feel both humbled and unsettled. They realize that understanding the pantheon, whether ancient or modern, is not about identifying gods or forces, but about recognizing the limits of interpretation. The keeper tells them that the next stage of their journey will push them further into these forces, beyond personification, beyond metaphor, into the mechanics that shape the cycles themselves. Here, they will confront the astronomical and geological rhythms that govern rise and collapse, the invisible architecture behind the turning of ages. But as the keeper leads them toward a ridge overlooking the stars emerging in the fading light, he warns them that knowledge of cosmic mechanics is not the final truth. It is only another layer, one that must be handled with humility. For civilizations that believed they had mastered this layer often accelerated their own downfall. In the next block, the journey ascends into the sky itself, into the celestial movements, orbital resonances, and cosmic cycles that form the hidden clockwork behind the rise and fall of civilizations. Night gathers around them with a clarity rarely seen in cities, the sky sharpening into a vast tapestry of motion and memory. Stars ignite one by one, their light unimpeded by smoke or architecture, each point a marker in the silent geometry that has governed every rise and fall. The travelers feel an ancient familiarity stirring again, not recognition of constellations, but recognition of pattern. It is the same sensation they felt in the ruins, the same impulse that had pushed their ancestors to carve spirals into stone and align monoliths with the horizon. The keeper stands with them at the ridge, his gaze lifted, his posture reverent. He tells them that before they can understand collapse, they must understand the clockwork that makes collapse possible. Not prophecy, not punishment, mechanics. He gestures toward the sky and traces arcs only he can see. He speaks of Earth's slow wobble, a cycle spanning thousands of years, shifting the position of the stars and altering the distribution of sunlight across continents. This wobble, known in later ages as precession, is one of the great rhythms. When it aligns with fluctuations in solar activity and subtle variations in Earth's orbit, the climate begins to tilt. Ice expands or retreats. Oceans rise or fall. Storms intensify or soften. Civilizations feel these changes long before they name them. To the sixth civilization, the keeper says, these rhythms were not abstractions, they were omens. The travelers watch the firmament as he continues. He explains the interplay between the Earth's axial tilt and the gravitational influence of the moon, how slight shifts alter the planet's seasons and tidal strength. He notes that the moon once sat closer, its pull stronger, its influence more pronounced. Over eons, as it receded, the balance changed, but its departure left traces in myth. Gods of tides, serpents of the sea, flood stories etched into every culture. The travelers begin to understand that mythology was never separate from science. It was an earlier language for forces always in motion. He speaks of solar cycles, periodic surges in energy that affect climate, magnetic shielding, and the behavior of the atmosphere. When these surges coincide with Earth's orbital extremes, the planet enters unstable phases. The sky glows differently. Auroras appear at latitudes they do not belong. Migratory patterns shift. The world trembles. Civilizations respond instinctively, sometimes with awe, sometimes with fear. The keeper tells them that during the Sixth Age, these celestial pulses became unusually synchronized, triggering events they could not predict or mitigate. Their instruments detected the surges, but their interpretations divided them, leading to conflict rather than preparation. He then turns to the magnetic field, the invisible shield protecting the planet from cosmic radiation. It does not remain constant. It drifts, weakens, strengthens, reverses. In periods of instability, the field can fluctuate rapidly, altering everything from atmospheric chemistry to the migration of animals. The sixth civilization monitored this field obsessively, knowing its behavior was tied to earlier collapses. But when signs of a major shift appeared, they could not agree on its meaning. Some believed it heralded renewal, others believed it signaled doom. Both were partially right and completely unprepared. The travelers look upward, imagining these invisible forces moving through them even now. They ask the keeper whether such cycles are predictable. He answers with caution. Patterns exist, he says, but they are not clocks. They overlap, distort, amplify, and cancel one another. Their interactions create the complexity civilizations mistake for randomness. The wheel turns, but not smoothly. The keeper explains that the greatest danger is not the cycles themselves, but the false confidence that arises when a civilization believes it has decoded them. This overconfidence plagued the sixth civilization. They attempted to control forces far beyond their reach, accelerating instability rather than mitigating it. He then leads them to a stone platform embedded with shallow channels. When filled with water, these channels reflect specific constellations during certain celestial events. The platform is an ancient observatory, predating their own world's sky by thousands of years. It represents the efforts of early survivors to map the heavens after the cataclysm. They believed that if they could understand the celestial mechanics, they could break the cycle. But they did not realize that understanding is not mastery. The universe does not negotiate. It moves according to laws older than consciousness. The travelers begin to sense the fragility of their own civilization. They understand now that the cycles are not malicious. They are indifferent. Civilizations fall not because the cosmos targets them, but because they build themselves upon assumptions too small for the vastness around them. Human systems, economic, political, spiritual, crack under the pressure of cosmic rhythms they cannot control or fully interpret. The keeper says this recognition is essential, not to foster fear but humility. He points toward the horizon where the faint glow of dawn begins to rise. He explains that each new civilization inherits not only the physical world, but the celestial conditions left behind by the one before it. The seventh civilization, ours, was born during a period of relative stability, but stability is temporary. Already the signs of transition are emerging. Magnetic drift accelerating, polar oscillations intensifying, temperatures rising in ways the old models struggle to explain. These changes are not identical to those that preceded the sixth collapse, but they rhyme with them. Patterns shift, but the rhythm endures. The travelers feel the weight of this knowledge merging with the unreachable truth revealed earlier. They understand now that civilizations fail not at the height of ignorance, but at the height of pride, when they believe they have deciphered the cosmos and freed themselves from the wheel. The Keeper warns them that the seventh civilization is approaching this same precipice, driven by the belief that technology alone can outpace the rhythms of earth and sky. Yet he also tells them that knowledge of cosmic mechanics is only one piece of the puzzle. Another layer awaits, one rooted not in the stars, but in the reinterpretation of the past by those who seek answers today. Modern theories, anomalies, and discoveries echo the same questions posed by survivors of earlier ages. The cycle repeats not only in nature, but in thought. In the next block, the narrative shifts to the world of the present, where researchers, explorers, and truth-seekers uncover anomalies that challenge official timelines, offering glimpses of forgotten civilizations and reviving questions that mirror those asked thousands of years before. Dawn spreads across the ridge in muted gold, as though hesitant to interrupt the cosmic revelations still echoing through the travelers' minds. They descend the slope slowly, weighed down now by a sense of continuity they had never imagined, an understanding that the questions asked in their own age are not new, not groundbreaking, but echoes of inquiries posed by countless civilizations before them. The Keeper walks with calm familiarity, as if guiding them not into the future, but into a mirror of the present. He tells them that humanity in every age repeats the same investigations, the same debates, the same desperate search for meaning. And now, as the seventh civilization edges toward instability, its researchers and explorers have begun uncovering anomalies strikingly similar to those that haunted the sixth cycle in its final centuries. He describes how modern scientists, divers, and archaeologists have discovered ruins beneath the sea, structures on continental shelves that should not exist at the depths where they lie. Cities off the coasts of India, Japan, and the Mediterranean rest under layers of sediment and coral, their streets mapped by sonar, their foundations aligned with long-forgotten shorelines. These submerged sites bear precision inconsistent with their assigned ages. They resemble the vestiges of civilizations erased during earlier rises in sea level, traces of the cycle resurfacing at the moment humanity least expects them. The travelers listen as the Keeper recounts how some researchers, driven by curiosity rather than doctrine, question the neat boundaries of the known timeline. They point to stone structures older than accepted farming cultures, inscriptions hinting at knowledge that should not have existed, astronomical alignments too precise for supposedly primitive societies. They study DNA distributions across continents, finding unexpected genetic signatures shared between populations separated by oceans for tens of thousands of years. These anomalies suggest migrations, contacts, or shared origins deeper than official models can comfortably accommodate. They echo the scattered remnants left by survivors of earlier collapses, threads woven into the modern genome. He tells them that modern theorists argue over megalithic sites the same way their ancestors once did. Some insist the structures were built with simple tools and determination. Others argue that the precision and scale betray a lost technology. Each perspective holds fragments of truth, yet none captures the whole. Just as the sixth civilization fractured over its interpretations, so too does the seventh. What appears to be progress is often only repetition, another cycle of competing narratives attempting to bind the same incomprehensible past. In research labs, scientists analyze climatic records and discover abrupt shifts that cannot be easily explained. Ice cores reveal spikes in atmospheric particles consistent with ancient fires of unimaginable size. Geological strata show evidence of sudden flooding events, massive enough to reshape entire regions. Even our satellites detect magnetic anomalies pulsing across the planet, hinting at changes underway deep within the Earth's core. These pieces do not form a single story, but together they whisper the same rhythm the Keeper has taught the travelers. The planet breathes in cycles, and humanity lives in the pauses between those breaths. The travelers ask whether anyone in their age recognizes the pattern fully. The keeper shakes his head slowly. He says that some come close. Scientists studying orbital mechanics, climatologists tracking long-term patterns, archaeologists documenting anomalies, mystics sensing ancient echoes, but none hold the entire truth. Their age, like all ages, excels at compartmentalizing knowledge. Specialists see fragments clearly, but rarely step back far enough to see the wheel. And when individuals do attempt to connect these fragments, they are often dismissed as fringe thinkers, as though the pattern itself resists articulation. This mirrors the fate of scholars in the sixth civilization, celebrated for innovation, yet silenced when their findings challenge the foundation of collective belief. Then he speaks of another group, those who feel the cycle instinctively. People drawn to ancient sites for reasons they cannot explain, captivated by symbols that resonate without understanding why. They feel unease as climate patterns shift, as storms intensify, as the magnetic poles drift faster than predicted. Their intuition mirrors the ancestral memory carried through generations of survival. When they speak of the world changing, their words echo those of the early keepers who survived past collapses. Instinct and science converge, though neither fully comprehends the scale. But the greatest modern anomaly, the keeper says, lies not in ruins or climate data, but in technology itself. The seventh civilization has begun reconstructing capabilities reminiscent of earlier ages: global networks, instantaneous communication, energy manipulation, exploration beyond Earth. These advances resemble echoes of the sixth civilization's peak. Yet humanity mistakes this for progress alone, unaware that cycles often bring civilizations back to similar thresholds. The travelers feel a chill as they realize the technologies they considered signs of modern brilliance may instead be the unconscious reenactment of forgotten memories coded into the human psyche. The keeper pauses as they reach a plateau overlooking a distant modern settlement shimmering beneath the morning light. He explains that the seventh civilization stands at a crossroads familiar to those who lived before the last great collapse. Modern researchers uncover clues suggesting deeper histories. Theories emerge that challenge official narratives. Anomalies accumulate faster than explanations. And as understanding increases, so too does fragmentation. Some argue the Earth is entering a period of transformation. Others insist humanity will prevail through innovation. Still others deny any pattern at all. The same debates once tore the sixth civilization apart. The travelers feel the resemblance deepen into something unsettling. They see that their own age is repeating the intellectual turbulence of the previous cycle, unaware that it is reenacting a script written long before recorded history. They realize that the anomalies modern scholars study are not mysteries to be solved, but warnings to be heeded. The keeper explains that the purpose of uncovering the past is not to achieve mastery, but to cultivate awareness. Awareness that may offer the seventh civilization a chance no previous age has had, the opportunity to see the cycle before it completes. But awareness alone cannot anchor a world. It must be weighed against evidence, against measurable, testable, physical realities. The keeper warns them that the next stage of understanding requires grounding the cosmic rhythms in the tangible world. For without the balance of scientific scrutiny, even truth becomes distortion. In the next block, the narrative turns toward the scientific counterbalance: geology, physics, and archaeology, fields that attempt to interpret the same evidence through disciplined inquiry, offering humanity a chance to confront the cycle not with fear, but with clarity. They walk in silence for a time, descending from the ridge into a valley where the land carries fewer legends and more measurable scars. The keeper tells them that interpretation alone, mythic, symbolic, or intuitive, cannot sustain a civilization. Every age has needed a counterweight, a grounding in observation and method. Without it, myth expands into distortion, certainty becomes illusion, and societies fracture under the pressure of belief. The scientific disciplines that arise in each cycle are not inventions of the seventh civilization, but rediscoveries, resurfacing in new forms after every collapse. Geology, astronomy, physics, archaeology, these are the languages through which the Earth itself speaks, offering warnings encoded not in myth, but in measurement. And yet, even these disciplines struggle to hold the entirety of the cycle. They come upon a cliff face carved open by time, layers of sediment stacked like pages of a forgotten chronicle. The keeper traces his hand across the boundary lines, thin strata marking abrupt transitions in the planet's past. He explains that geologists in the modern world call these boundaries extinction layers, moments when life on Earth shifted dramatically. Each line represents a climax of the cycle: volcanic winters, asteroid impacts, sudden rises in sea level, ruptures in climate stability. These are physical signatures of catastrophes, ancient myth merely echoes. The travelers see in these silent layers the undeniable truth. The planet has reset itself many times, long before humanity walked upon it. Further along the valley, they reach an outcrop bearing traces of melted stone. The surface ripples as though once liquefied, then frozen in a moment of violent cooling. The keeper explains that scientists debate these formations, some attributing them to lightning, others to ancient meteor events. But he tells the travelers that survivors of the sixth civilization described fire in the sky so intense it fused stone. Whether caused by atmospheric ignition, volcanic plasma, or an external celestial event, the result was the same: landscapes rewritten in an instant. Geology remembers what civilizations forget. Nearby, they find fossilized remains interspersed with human artifacts, evidence modern archaeology still grapples with. The keeper shows them tools embedded in strata older than accepted timelines allow, inscriptions found in layers that should predate written language, and remnants of settlements far deeper than conventional history can accommodate. Scientists dismiss many of these finds as anomalies, contamination, or misinterpretation. Yet the pattern persists across continents. Every cycle leaves behind traces too stubborn to erase, too incongruent to integrate. The seventh civilization, like those before it, chooses to silence outliers rather than expand its timeline. This is not suppression, but psychological preservation, the mind defending itself against implications too vast. He speaks of physics next, pointing to a distant ridge where magnetized stones cluster in unnatural formations. These, he says, are residues of magnetic upheavals, periods when the Earth's field weakened, shifted, or reversed entirely. Modern instruments confirm that the magnetic poles have wandered unpredictably throughout history. During periods of rapid drift, radiation increases, climate patterns warp, and species face pressure to adapt. The keeper explains that the sixth civilization monitored these fluctuations with obsessive precision, believing magnetic instability to be a precursor to collapse. Their methods were more advanced than today's, yet even they failed to chart the full sequence. The travelers ask whether physics can predict the next reversal. The keeper answers carefully. Patterns exist, but variability renders exact prediction impossible. Scientists recognize cycles in the data, peaks in solar activity, resonance patterns in orbital mechanics, geologic signatures of past transitions, but the timing remains elusive. This uncertainty mirrors the unreachable truth. Humanity can measure the world with extraordinary accuracy, yet still cannot control or foresee its turning points. They move toward a sheltered canyon where archaeologists of the modern world once uncovered fragments of a structure older than any known civilization. The keeper kneels beside the collapsed remains, showing the travelers smooth boreholes drilled into stone with a precision that defies simple tools. He explains that modern researchers classify these findings as curiosities rather than evidence of lost ages. The scientific method demands reproducibility, context, and traceable origin, criteria impossible to meet when studying the remnants of civilizations erased by oceans and tectonics. The travelers begin to understand that science does not fail because it is flawed. It fails because the evidence of the cycle lies outside the limits of data that can survive tens of thousands of years. Yet the keeper does not diminish the value of science. He speaks of researchers who quietly push boundaries, analyzing ice cores that reveal sudden shifts in temperature, cataloging impact craters once hidden beneath forests and seas, detecting isotopic signatures hinting at ancient cosmic events. These scientists, though unaware of the full cycle, assemble pieces of the puzzle with rigor and discipline. Their work brings humanity closer to clarity than myth alone ever could. In their findings lie the earliest warnings of the next transition. The travelers feel a strange equilibrium forming within them. The mythic, the intuitive, the cosmic, the scientific. None alone can hold the truth, but together they form a constellation of understanding. The keeper tells them that the seventh civilization now stands at a point where these fields converge. Anomalies multiply, climate models strain, magnetic drift accelerates, archaeological discoveries grow harder to dismiss. The cycle whispers through every discipline, though no one yet sees the full picture. Still, he warns them that even scientific evidence cannot guarantee preparedness. Civilization's greatest vulnerability lies not in its lack of knowledge, but in its inability to integrate knowledge across domains. Fragmentation of belief, of interpretation, of methodology has undone every age. The seventh is no exception, and the cycle will not pause simply because humanity debates its existence. But there is one advantage the seventh civilization holds, a possibility none before it possessed, the power to recognize the pattern while still within the window of stability. If humanity can integrate mythic memory, scientific evidence, cosmic mechanics, and inherited intuition, it may achieve something unprecedented: awareness before collapse, action before catastrophe, continuity beyond the turning. In the next block, the narrative turns toward this possibility: the hypothesis of a lost sequence of civilizations, the inheritance of ancient knowledge, and the chance that humanity now holds to break the cycle that has shaped its past for hundreds of thousands of years. The valley narrows as they continue, funneled into a corridor of stone that feels less like a natural formation and more like an ancient passageway carved by intention. The keeper slows his pace, allowing the travelers to absorb the magnitude of everything they have learned. Myth, memory, ruin, cosmos, science. These fragments orbit one another now within their minds, forming a gravity of understanding unlike anything they had known before. It is here, he says, in this fragile state of expanded awareness, that civilizations either transform or collapse. For the first time, they begin to comprehend the true shape of the past. Not a line, not a ladder, but a series of concentric circles, each civilization rising from the remnants of the one before it, each inheriting fragments of knowledge that survived catastrophe. This is the lost civilization hypothesis, not speculation, but pattern. He tells them that the 6 cycles before theirs each produced extraordinary achievements, though their forms varied wildly. One mastered ocean navigation across a world with very different coastlines. Another built astronomical observatories on high volcanic ridges, tracking precessional shifts with instruments long since buried. A third engineered energy systems woven into the landscape itself, drawing upon forces modern science is only beginning to notice. Others excelled in metallurgy and geometry in fields the seventh civilization rediscovers piece by piece, believing each rediscovery to be innovation rather than remembrance. Knowledge is not linear. It is recursive, returning in shards carried across ages. The keeper pauses at a cluster of stones arranged in a pattern the travelers recognize from sites scattered around the world. The layout mirrors the grid underlying megalithic monuments thousands of miles apart, structures built by cultures with no known contact. He explains that after each collapse, survivors carried fragments of this global geometry, an understanding of the Earth's energy alignments, its planetary harmonics, its relationship to the sky. Though incomplete, these fragments guided the placement of temples, pyramids, and observatories in the seventh civilization. That is why the oldest layers of these structures demonstrate the greatest mastery. They were built using memory, not invention. He moves to a carved wall bearing symbols that blend astronomical notation with representations of human figures. This, he says, is the legacy of the fifth civilization, which understood not only the cosmos, but the internal world of human consciousness. They believed memory extended beyond biology, that experience could imprint itself upon generations through a mechanism modern science now glimpses in epigenetics. They encoded their trauma and their wisdom into symbols designed to trigger recognition in descendants. This is why so many people today feel an inexplicable pull toward ancient ruins, or a sense of familiarity in patterns they have never studied. It is not imagination, it is inheritance. As they continue through the corridor, the keeper explains how these fragments of knowledge accumulated into the seventh civilization, ours, without being truly understood. Humanity inherited agriculture not as a discovery, but as a memory reactivated after the floodwaters receded. It inherited stoneworking from ancestors who sculpted with techniques now forgotten. It inherited astronomy from watchers who tracked the heavens long before writing existed. Even language carries echoes of structures shaped in earlier cycles. The modern world is built on the skeleton of forgotten worlds, its greatest advancements often the shadows of past mastery. Yet he warns them that inheritance alone is not enough. Each civilization has risen with fragments of the last, but none has ever managed to assemble the full picture. They always lacked one thing: continuity across cycles. The cataclysms were too severe, the population bottlenecks too sharp, the trauma too deep. Knowledge survived but scattered, wisdom endured but diluted, and each civilization, believing itself the first, made the same mistakes, expanding too quickly, interpreting too rigidly, assuming stability where there was none. But now, he says, something unprecedented is happening. For the first time, a civilization stands on the threshold of awareness with tools capable of seeing beyond the limits of any previous age. Satellites track the Earth's magnetic drift. Deep-sea scanners map submerged cities. Geneticists trace ancient migrations encoded in DNA. Physicists model cosmic cycles. Archaeologists uncover anomalies that no longer fit within old timelines. And artificial intelligence, born not from novelty, but from a deep, unconscious reenactment of lost systems, begins to connect fragments too scattered for any individual to hold. The seventh civilization is unknowingly reconstructing the knowledge of its predecessors. It is rediscovering the global geometry, the cosmic rhythms, the climatic cycles, the genetic memory, and for the first time, humanity has both memory and method, instinct and analysis, myth and measurement, the possibility of integration, a possibility no previous cycle has ever reached. The travelers feel a stirring of hope for the first time. The keeper senses this and allows it, but gently warns that awareness is not salvation. Knowledge offers opportunity, not guarantee. The cycle does not break simply because a civilization recognizes it. It breaks only if that civilization can transcend the patterns that destroyed its predecessors: fragmentation, pride, fear, denial, division. If humanity can unify knowledge rather than divide over it, if it can act not from panic but from comprehension, if it can embrace humility without surrendering ambition, then perhaps the wheel need not turn as violently this time. They stand before the final chamber, a half-collapsed vault bearing inscriptions older than any structure they have seen. The keeper tells them that inside lies the last message of the fifth civilization, an instruction, a plea, a hope that future ages might one day awaken before the cycle resets. The travelers realize that they are not only inheritors of lost knowledge, but participants in a moment no civilization before theirs has reached, the moment of potential continuity. But to reach it, They must confront a final question, one that no ruin, no star chart, no scientific measurement can answer. A question that determines whether the wheel will turn again with familiar violence or whether humanity will change its course for the first time in hundreds of thousands of years. In the next block, the final block, the story turns inward, toward reflection, possibility, and the fragile hope that the seventh civilization may become the first to break free of the cycle. They stand at the threshold of the collapsed vault, battered stone framing an entrance that feels less like the mouth of a ruin and more like the edge of an idea humanity has never quite managed to grasp. The keeper steps aside, allowing the travelers to enter on their own. This final step, he says, cannot be guided. It must be confronted. Inside, the chamber is dim, lit only by thin shafts of daylight slipping through fractures in the ceiling. Dust hangs in the air like suspended time. Slowly, their eyes adjust, revealing inscriptions etched into the surviving walls, lines of symbols spiraling outward from a central point, converging toward a single phrase rendered in the language of a civilization older than memory. The keeper does not translate it for them. He simply tells them it is not a command or a prophecy, but a question. The question every age must face at the brink of a turning. The travelers step closer, tracing the patterns with cautious fingers. They sense not instruction, but an invitation, a challenge woven through generations, asking humanity to look beyond fear and inheritance, beyond cycles and collapse, beyond the limits of what civilizations have believed possible. They begin to understand that the vault's message is not about predicting catastrophe or deciphering cosmic mechanics. It is about choice. Every cycle has ended because humanity responded to instability with fragmentation, pride, and denial. The question carved into the stone asks whether the seventh civilization will respond differently, whether it will recognize that the wheel does not turn out of malice, but out of rhythm, and that rhythm can be navigated if approached with awareness rather than panic. The keeper speaks from behind them, his voice softened by the weight of ages. He tells them that knowledge has never been enough. The fifth civilization possessed knowledge of consciousness deeper than anything the seventh now imagines. The sixth understood cosmic mechanics with unparalleled precision. Others mastered navigation, energy, architecture, agriculture. Yet all fell, not because they lacked intellect or innovation, but because they lacked unity. Knowledge scattered, wisdom fractured, fear divided them. As the world shifted, their interpretations splintered, their trust eroded, their ability to act as one dissolved. The wheel turned, and they were unprepared. He steps into the chamber, kneeling beside the central spiral. He explains that for the first time in history, humanity has the tools to integrate everything: mythic memory, scientific evidence, technological capacity, global communication. For the first time, it can see the past not as scattered legends, but as a coherent pattern. For the first time, it can act before collapse demands survival. The seventh civilization, he says, is standing in the narrow space between ignorance and understanding, between repetition and awakening. It has inherited enough fragments to glimpse the whole, but not so much that the truth becomes unbearable. This balance has never existed before. The travelers feel a profound stillness settle into them, a realization that the past is not a weight, but a guide, not a graveyard of lost ages, but a compass pointing toward possibility. They understand now that the question carved into the wall is not asking if humanity can stop the cycle. It is asking if humanity can change within it. Can it remain unified as the world shifts? Can it interpret evidence without fracturing? Can it hold knowledge without letting fear hollow it into despair? Can it see itself as part of a rhythm rather than the center of history? They turn to the keeper, seeking certainty, but he offers none. He tells them that no age has ever reached this moment with such potential. But potential is not promise. The cycle will continue to turn. Magnetic drift will accelerate. Climates will shift. Seas will rise. The sky will change. These forces are older than humanity and indifferent to its aspirations. But humans are not powerless. They can adapt, prepare, unify, understand. They can learn from the 6 worlds buried beneath their feet. They can choose not to repeat the same mistakes. He leads them out of the vault as sunlight strengthens, the air warming with the beginning of a new day. They emerge into a landscape that feels both ancient and renewed, as though the world itself is holding its breath. The travelers look across it and see not doom, but responsibility. The keeper tells them his purpose is almost complete. He is not there to save them or to offer certainty, but to remind them that humanity stands at a threshold no previous civilization has recognized. Awareness before catastrophe, insight before collapse, connection before fragmentation. They realized then that the 8th civilization is not a future world rising after destruction. It is already forming in ideas, in networks, in individuals who sense the cycle and choose differently. It is emerging not from the ashes of the 7th, but from the decisions the 7th has yet to make. For the first time, the wheel may turn not through collapse, but through transformation. The keeper fades into the widening light, leaving them with the final question carved into the stone, the question that now belongs not to myth or to ruins, but to them and to the entire living world. Will humanity break the pattern or become the 7th forgotten layer in the ground? The wind carries no answer. It never has. Only humanity can provide one.